Good afternoon. I've shared in the past how that I get on a topic or a flow and I stick with it, and usually lasts a couple of weeks of intense energies, ponderings, unsolicited by myself on a certain arena, a certain topic, a certain area. And I've been talking a lot about the mind and how to use the mind, how to stop being the slave, how to ignore any directions or advice from the mind as far as the course of living your life, decision making. None of these things are in the realm of usefulness as far as the mind is concerned. The mind can become an ally instead of an enemy. The mind can become a supporter of your journey, your search, instead of a propagator and supporter of your ego. And I've shared in depth with my experiments with the mind. And I've always come back to this was prompted by the failure of 30 years of Rinzai Zen. Being able to silence the mind, quiet the mind, much less silence. How that I chose to look at the mind in another way. First by laughing at its overwhelming sense of self-importance and of individuality, of separateness and division, of superiority, judgmental aspects being the last vestiges of my mind work. And I shared over and over again that it was this failure to silence the mind, which I thought was the primary directive of Zen Buddhism, was that inside of this ability that when you could be still, when you could still the mind, when you could stop its incessant, when you've already conquered the monkey mind to go on to the finer mind, the mind of the intellect, the less base part of the mind. Monkey mind is the basis part. But as you transgress to seeing the finer aspect, the more refined aspect of the mind, and then work with that. I began by laughter, and then began by assigning tasks to my mind, which was sorting, filing, and storing information that morphed from information through this process of study and sorting and filing. Took information to knowledge, ultimately to accessible wisdom, and even inaccessible wisdom to be filed, to be accessed at a later date. And I was pretty content with this. This basically made me abandon not really abandon, but reconsider the strict disciplines of Rinzai Zen as I saw them. Self-imposed discipline, self-imposed restrictions, self-imposed limitations, if you will. and caused me to go back to look at the earlier days, my earlier attempts, my earlier avenues of study. Come back to Hinduism. Everything is full circle, as so it turns out. So I came back full circle to take a look at, and then pursued, kind of abandoned the idea and what I saw as constraints, as seeking to silence my mind. I did learn to tame it. I did learn to ignore it. I did learn to laugh at it. And then this led me to search for the answer if we're meant to be mindless. The opposite of mindful, right? Even the word mindful. Wouldn't it be mindless if the objective was to conquer the mind? To relegate the mind, to stifle it, to silence it? So it'd be mindlessness, wouldn't it? But through the practice of mindfulness, I learned to find the suitable usage of the mind for me, to use this fine tool in answer to that question, why we were given this mind in the first place. There seemed to be, as in all things, a purpose. So finding the purpose of the mind and relaxing all the striving to silence the mind. So I kind of came to a place where that I was okay with the noise of the mind. I wanted to go back to pardon me where I just do a little shifting here. I want to look to something that I just read from Eckhart Tolle. And it's particularly relevant here, and so I want to go back to it, talking about the mind and silencing the mind. And he said something that touched me, that meant something to me. And he said, I can stop thinking whenever I want to stop thinking. And he said this was his pinnacle of spiritual development. He's, as far as I know, never claimed to be awakened or enlightened. But he said this, that I can stop thinking whenever I want to stop thinking. And I thought, wow. That's a really, and this is it, just read this a couple days, and as I said, when I need to know something, I will know it. When I need information for the appropriate moment, it comes. And I don't know when he said this, but I just know that I became aware of it a couple of days just through scrolling through some other things. So, again, it challenged me in that I had more or less decided that personally, not only couldn't I silence my mind, but instead I would utilize it in my own spiritual pursuits. And the lesson that immediately came to mind as I thought about Tolle's sharing as his single greatest accomplishment on his spiritual path. He can stop thinking when he wants to stop thinking. And then it became, I never adopted the point of view that I wanted to stop thinking. I never wanted to stop thinking. I did all the things that I thought would help in the process and found them falling short. But I had never sought to stop thinking, to focus completely on. And I'm always, if nothing else, I'm always willing to reevaluate, to learn, to accept new information and try to incorporate in my worldview, my world spiritual view. So it just, it was an aha moment. I said, I never asked myself, simply asked myself to stop thinking. I never entertained, because maybe the mind, and I was enamored of the mind's uses and successfully navigating the trappings of the mind to get to the point where it could be useful it could become useful to stop thinking. And the point, it's funny to me that it never even dawned on me until 2 days ago that I could have simply asked my mind to give me a break, to stop. And I saw immediately that this connection to bliss, and I've shared before that bliss is something that I taste very, very infrequently. It comes at its own behest. Moments of bliss. But I find bliss unsustainable. I find bliss as the doorway to departure. True bliss is the way to leave your physical body, your physical incarnation behind. And I still find it useful. I still have some use. So bliss comes at its own behest, as I shared. Doesn't visit for but flashes of moments, just momentary flash of bliss. Enough to taste its fruit, enough to long for more, but not enough that would make it impossible to sustain my physical being. But it seems interesting to me that now I see the link between bliss and the ability to silence the mind. But I wonder, when Eckhart says I can stop thinking whenever I want to stop thinking, I wonder who the I is. That's where I get stuck. Not for him, but my I. And so I thought, perhaps I have to look, I can stop thinking whenever I want. I just heard the eyes were just writ large, and no criticism intended or unintended of Eckhart Tolle, but I just wondered at that moment for myself, if I said I want to stop thinking when I want to stop thinking, I just immediately was drawn to, what is this I? And undeniably, I like to recognize Eckhart, Mr. Tolle, for giving me an opportunity to challenge, to review, to reflect on elements of myself in my own spiritual path and progress. But having experienced the I, the I, me, my, who is I, me, my, having experienced the resolution that the I, the me, and the my is part of Maya, it's part of an illusion, it's part of separateness. So that caused even a deeper immersion into this old conundrum of silencing the mind. Was I correct to just accept that I can't do it? It couldn't be done? That it wasn't in the realm of possibilities for me? And I was quick to point out that I never challenged anyone else's ability to silence the mind. But what I was interested about is the effort. It seems to me effort is kind of a folly. Everything that I put effort into eventually would fail, as the effort I put into silencing the mind, my mind, silencing. It's really hard not to use pronouns, I, me, my. It's really hard. So I give Mr. Tolle a break when he say, I can stop thinking whenever I want to.
Just a sec. Still trying. Sorry, I'm having trouble with the connection. Please try again in a moment.
Siri's talking to me, and caught me mid-set. Siri's talking to me on my iPhone, and I didn't even ask her a question. But I'm back to looking, so I'm back to reviewing that maybe my acceptance of not silencing the mind was prefaced on a misunderstanding, a shortcoming of experience. I hadn't experienced what I needed to experience to make possible the silencing of the mind. I knew intrinsically, intuitively, I knew that it wasn't through my own efforts. And that's what I surrendered. I surrendered my own efforts. And it doesn't mean I accepted that it couldn't be done. I accepted my lack of understanding how it's done. How is it accomplished? And that's where I've been the last few days. And what I do now is I just wait. Something comes to me, this comes to me, I just sit with it, I just be with it. And I always know that there's a reason, that I have to be receptive, I have to be open. Most importantly, I have to be paying attention. That a messenger is soon to appear. So this has showed me that when I get to something like this, the mind and its usefulness and how to use it, and it's something new. My last sharing, ultimate union. I didn't really speak of it much. I titled it, but this ultimate union. This is exactly what I'm talking about. There will be a union of what is, a deeper understanding, peeling the layer of the onion. Hopefully not crying as I'm peeling, not crying the whole time, but instead celebrating, being thankful that these events occur in my life. So I was drawn to a figure that I hadn't really focused on before, an adept from the past. Many say the most evolved adept soul that's chosen, that made the choice after their own awakening. We're given a choice to remain on this earthly plane and help all sentient beings, as Buddha spoke to, helped all sentient beings to remember what they'd forgotten through the process of waking up to being what they've always been, for seeing what they've always seen, for feeling what they've always felt. If given this choice, and since I've always understood that Earth is really in the scheme of things, a lower end of the evolutionary process spiritually, that there's realms, there's lots to go. So many people that become Buddhas, that awake to their Buddhahood, is what I mean, will go on to the challenges of the next realm. But you're given a choice. And in the West, we call them ascended masters. These souls that have chosen to stay behind, to help everyone else. And it's said, and I feel in my heart that Babaji is amongst these ascended masters, and maybe at the top of the hierarchy, because there always is a hierarchy. There's always somebody farther ahead. There's always someone behind. There's a hierarchy. And this hierarchy by no means is any divisive or about separateness. It's just the essence. It's much as we have a personality, and this personality, each of the ascended masters, each of the yogis, each of the Buddhas had their distinct, unique personality. So too is this hierarchical structure. But I've been drawn to Babaji, to learning about him. I know that he was in the lineage of Paramahamsa Yogananda, through Babaji's disciple to his disciple to Yogananda himself, and they talk about Kriya Yoga, and this is the gift that Paramahamsa brought from Babaji, and Babaji got it from someone else, even though what his lineage is a little bit, it's pretty much unknown, just as we know little about him in his last earthly experience. But it was through this fascination and this interest in this, the universe provided me with an opportunity, and I'm always watching for an opportunity. One never knows when they come, but for me the process is something comes to mind, something that I stick with. I've noticed that this has been possible by making these videos. I've noticed that before maybe I never paid attention to that. I would stick with something and something would happen, and then pretty much wait to whatever next was brought my way. So and it's always interesting when I think I've resolved something and that I'm done with that and moving on. This is like a little mini lesson, a little wake-up call to that end. That nothing begins and nothing ends. It's a continuation. This is why we're human beings, not human being. It's this continuation. So I started watching. I love YouTube. You know, it's my platform to reach out, and it's a really source of. It's very useful to me. And I started watching some videos about Babaji to learn more about him. And then I was very interested because my own studies with Paramahamsa Self-Realization Fellowship was a direct part of the lineage. And as I accepted Paramahamsa as my first teacher, although he passed before I was born, and before I really understood that teachers from the past are wonderful, but we all need in our process to find the teacher in the flesh who can participate, who can demonstrate what it's like to be confined with the restrictions of all the restrictions that it means it being a human being, being alive, contained. That you need this, that I needed this experience at a certain time in my progression, in my journey. And I shared, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And the other side of that, you don't hear as much as, when the student is ready, the teacher disappears. Such was my experience. Such was my blessing. But a contemporary of Paramahamsa, I won't go into names, I know the names, but as a contemporary of Paramahamsa's guru, another yogi was a guru to a future yogi. And it was this future yogi that I found on the internet. And he shared his experience actually going to the Himalayas and meeting Babaji, meeting the spirit, finding his place that his essence dwelled, although his essence dwells in all of us. And he said several interesting things. He said, an innocent child can immediately connect with Babaji. He's so available. An innocent child can do it instantly, whereas a more mature or more wizened, an older entity struggles, an older being, an older human struggles with this connection. And so as soon as he said that, I said, yeah, no wonder it took me so long to get to something that if I was a simple, pure child, if I retained my childlike innocence, I could have made the connection quite quickly. But he said in the process of going, this maybe it's an allegorical journey, it doesn't matter, maybe it's a real journey, but the point that hit home was that he got to a point where his mind he said, when the mind dissolves into awareness, and what takes its place, when this mind melts, when the dissolution, when the mind dissolves into awareness, this is samadhi. Samadhi, the ecstasy of expanded consciousness with no thought at all. Well, samadhi and bliss in my lingua franca is one and the same. So it wasn't through effort, it wasn't through trying. Just as ultimate awakening, abiding awakening was only occurred after you give up, was giving up of this attempt to master my mind, to silence my mind. It was giving up this attempt. And it was the acceptance that failing to do so was okay. I was completely 100% okay with that. And now, this morning, I came to understand, as it only could be, that silencing the mind was a divine gift. It had to be given to me in the understanding that it dissolves into awareness. So those brief flashes of bliss are all evident of my success, of successfully, not my success, successfully silencing the mind. It was a gift that comes